really big issue right now in Louisiana is carbon capture and storage. What I'm afraid is that Louisiana might get in this business. It's not going to reduce CO2. Someday those subsidies are going to go away and we're going to be stuck with all this infrastructure.
He's an author. He also worked as the Deputy Associate Administrator for the EPA in the Obama administration.
90% of the excess heat that we've created goes into the ocean.
You're listening to A Climate Change. This is Matern, your host. I've got a great guest on the program, Rob Verchick. Rob is a professor at the Loyola Law School in New Orleans. He teaches environmental law there. He's an author of a book, Octopus in the Parking Garage. He also worked as the Deputy Associate Administrator for the EPA in the Obama administration. And Rob, you were a guest on our show back in the middle of the Biden administration, right after the IRA was passed. And now we're kind of in a different place than, that position was.
Yeah, how you doing, Matt? It's great to be on the show. We are in a very different place. In the Biden administration with the Inflation Reduction Act and also the infrastructure, the bipartisan infrastructure law, there was a lot of activity going on, pushing billions, tens of billions of dollars into the states for the purpose of cleaning up the energy grid, building back infrastructure, building resilience to climate change. A lot of that money actually, and some of it was private investment that came as a result of the federal investment, but a lot of that money continued to go to the states. There was a real move to try to, as I say, get that money out the door, tail end of the administration. But I think it's fair to say that not all of the investment happened, given the transfer to the Trump administration. And and this new budget bill that the Congress is looking at right now could have some effects to pull or claw back some of that money, which is going to help, which is going to hurt all the states. But ironically, it's going to hurt the states that went for Trump. 80% of the money that I just described was earmarked for states, so-called red states, and so I think that it's going to have big effects in many parts of the country.
Yeah, the self-destructive nature of this policy change to me, it feels like Trump is just so angry at any non-fossil fuel energy that he wants to destroy because he sees it as a political threat to him.
I think that's right. I mean, it's hard to understand exactly what motivates the president at any given time, but it is certainly true, for instance, that, as Bill McKibben says, who I know has been on the show just recently, the cheapest way to make electricity is to point a pane of glass at the sun. And so by taking away, the prospects of wind or solar, or at least making it harder, it's going to make all electricity in the United States more expensive and less resilient because those sources of energy cope better, with storms and other sorts of things. I think one of it, and I'm glad that we have shows like yours, because a lot of this, I think, is a communications issue. I mean, I'm absolutely, I used to live in Missouri and in Kansas too. And I'm sure the folks there have no idea of the amount of money that was coming in from the Biden administration that was helping things and creating jobs that they were experiencing.
Right, particularly those central states like Kansas. They were saying it was kind of like the OPEC of wind, that somewhere around 40%, 50%. I think some of those states had gotten up into maybe higher, 60% plus of their electricity coming from wind energy. So really cutting off their nose to spite their face to cut off funding for wind.
Yeah, one of the things actually that I have been looking into and working on is, and this is a story that I haven't seen really in the mainstream press a lot, But there are many states, several states that have been really good, let's say, on wind. You mentioned Kansas, Iowa's another one, Texas. And some of those states have created laws that are actually making it harder for wind farms, let's say, to operate or to be established. And the same with solar. In Louisiana, we have a couple of parishes that make it harder because in order to have solar. And when you start asking people about why that is, there's so much disinformation. I talked to somebody in politics in one of the parishes in Louisiana who said they were afraid that the solar panels on the ground would reflect light and blind pilots who were flying in planes. And for that reason, they were concerned. And many of these movements in support of these laws are, in fact, backed by the oil and gas industry. And so, some of the states, including Texas, which used to have, I mean, it had a remarkable wind program, still does, and was, producing more wind energy than almost anywhere in the United States. Now it's starting to bring in laws and policies that are dismantling that, which is, absolutely opposite to the interests of most of the people living in that state.
Well, I think it'll adversely affect their economy too, because
Yeah.
they were benefiting by a lot of industry moving there, made it cheaper power costs and all those types of things, and now it'll be more expensive to run factories there than it used to be.
Yeah, that's right.
What are you working on now? What's kind of front of mind for you?
Well, as you know, I wrote a book a few years ago called Octopus in the Parking Garage, which you mentioned, which was about climate resilience, primarily in the United States and on land. And now I'm working on a book on oceans and coasts and climate resilience in the ocean. And so I actually just got back from the United Nations Ocean Conference, which was in France this year. It was quite exciting. I mean, there are people from all over the world there talking about many different kinds of policies related to the ocean. And a lot of people don't realize it, but there are at least three very large international agreements that are going to be opening and taking effect that are going to do some really good things to improve the health of the oceans. And the ocean is extremely vulnerable to climate change, and as a result, we're very vulnerable as a result too.
Right. It seems as though really the ocean is the dumping ground for all of our CO2. It's absorbing most of it. And there's a lot of concern that the deep ocean is being adversely affected by all of this and the acidification. I guess I'd ask that question along with how is the Trump administration likely to go along with any treaty that's actually pro-environment?
Well, okay, I'll take those questions in order, okay? But yeah, it's true that as I'm writing in the book, the ocean is just one giant sponge, and it absorbs both heat and carbon dioxide, as you point out. 90% of the heat, excess heat that we've created with carbon pollution, 90% of that heat goes into the ocean, which is incredibly lucky for us because we'd be burned to a crisp if that weren't true. But what that means is there's a lot of heat in the ocean, and all of the life in the ocean has to deal with that. Now, it's also, as you say, it's absorbing about a quarter to a third of the carbon dioxide that we've put into the atmosphere, which is another great win for us because we couldn't survive with that much CO2 in the atmosphere. But what it's doing is turning when that CO2 goes into the seawater, like as you say, it turns into carbonic acid, and it makes the ocean much closer to vinegar than it does, to the way that it used to be, and that's making it harder for coral reefs to build and for oysters to grow shells. It's going to affect the seafood industry tremendously, and the rest. So what's going on in terms of sort of international politics on this? I was astounded. So the Ocean Conference, there's only been three of them. This was the third. It was in Nice, France, highly attended. This is what the UN has dubbed the the decade of the ocean because of some agreements that I'll explain. And there were, I mean, it was the heads of state, many heads of state there, security, of course, very tight, many exciting things going on. And the United States did not even send a delegation to this event, which was amazing. I mean, China had a delegation. The Saudi Arabian government had representatives there. You know, everybody was there. And but I have to say, one of the things that was interesting is that, you know, the discussion, you know, at these large events and even the smaller ones too, was people are just moving forward. They're not thinking about the United States. They're thinking about maybe companies, U.S. companies that are making money and doing work, and some universities. But for the most part, it's the rest of the world. So, you know, a few things that are going to be happening, for instance, is that by the end of this summer, we'll probably have ratified among the nations, scores and scores of nations, will have ratified a treaty called informally called the High Seas Treaty, which is about protecting marine life and fish and protecting against pollution on seas which are not in any country's jurisdiction, which, as you might imagine, is a really big deal, right? You know, because there's a lot of illegal activity and illegal fishing and human trafficking, all kinds of things going on in the high seas. And so there's that. There is a lot of movement on a new treaty to control plastics in the ocean. That is getting a lot of attention and is going to create a lot of money for companies that figure out how to work with that. And there is also a lot of movement in building what they call marine protected areas, which are enormous sort of parks, marine parks, we might call them, in which fish are protected in the waters. And what people are realizing is that when you protect these areas, first of all, you get a more sustainable fish catch. And so you actually end up in the long run making more money out of all of this. And the second thing you get is you relieve some of the stress that the climate change has placed on the ocean. Because the ocean is an amazing machine and it can rebound and it can come back, but we've got to give it breathing space. And so that's what these agreements are intended to do.
Well, it's fantastic to hear the progress that is being made and kind of the world not waiting for the U.S. and I mean maybe it's a positive. I was reading that the U.S. wasn't there to muck up the treaties and try to throw roadblocks into them. So maybe it was a positive that Trump and his crew weren't at the conference.
Well, you know, it's a funny thing. I think there's some truth in that. A lot of people don't realize, we've all heard, I think, or many of us have heard, you know, of the phrase the law of the sea. There is, in fact, a law, an international law of the sea under a UN agreement from the 1980s. And the United States isn't a member of that. Because Ronald Reagan didn't want the United States to join. So almost every country in the world is part of the so-called law of the sea, except us. We abide by almost everything in it, and we certainly profit from the fact of having it, but we're not in it. And so we don't really get much of a chance as the United States to influence these laws because we're really not at the table when they come into effect. And that's unfortunate, I think, for a number of reasons, including economic ones, because, you know, we could build a structure that would be in our economic interest otherwise.
Turning back to your home state of Louisiana, or at least your current home state, you know, they're talking about building a lot of liquefied natural gas plants along the Mississippi River, and what's happening there? Is that happening? Are they starting those projects or not?
Yeah, they definitely are. Louisiana is actually, it's really interesting right now to see what's going on the coast in terms of oil and gas. So as one of the things you pointed out is there's a movement to export uh, more natural gas, right? And the way that you do that is you liquefy it so that you can ship it in other places. And so there's a real desire on industry to build those what they call LNG facilities, liquefied natural gas facilities. Another really big issue right now in Louisiana is carbon capture and storage. That's the idea where, or the technology in which you might imagine a electric plant, a natural gas powered electric plant, let's say, that would produce a lot of carbon dioxide, and instead of putting it into the air, what it would do is it would pump that into pipes that would highly concentrate it, sort of like dry ice, really, and then move it and bury it underground forever. And the idea there is that you get to have your consumption of fossil fuel and refining and so on, which creates CO2, and then you just bury all that stuff in the ground forever in depleted oil wells or other features underground. There's a lot of interest in Louisiana for doing this, and, in fact, a lot of the funding for it was provided the federal funding was provided by the Biden administration, and those are the subsidies that may be protected, as we go forward in the Trump administration. I don't think it's a good idea. I think it's pretty dangerous. We've never done it at scale. There's no, record that you could possibly store this high pressure gas underground for, ever, or hundreds, thousands of years. And the other thing that's really interesting to me is there's no way that it works unless the federal government just continues to pour money into it, because they would be paying industry to store their waste underground. Consumers aren't going to pay for them to do that. So somebody's got to pay for them to do that. And so it's basically just a permanent subsidy that would never, ever go away. And what I'm afraid is that Louisiana might get in this business. It's not going to reduce CO2 very much. I was on I've worked on the governor's panel researching that. Is no way it will. And then what's going to happen is someday those subsidies are going to go away, and we're going to be stuck with all this infrastructure. But anyway, those are two things going on. I'll just mention one other thing in Louisiana. We would love to get offshore wind in Louisiana because in the Gulf, we have some of the best places available for that. The construction of those offshore wind operations, we know how to do that in Louisiana because we're already producing in my city, in New Orleans, we are producing the long turbine blades. In Homa, a short drive from where I live, we build the boats that put those wind turbines together offshore. And those big leggings, what they call jackets in the industry, we build those too. And the Cajuns in Louisiana have built offshore wind off the coast of the Atlantic and the North Sea and all over the place. And we could do it in the Gulf, but President Trump has said that he is very against offshore wind and doesn't want any money going into it. And so we've got a lot of people kind of on hold. I mean, as you might imagine, there are a lot of industries that would love to get involved in this in Louisiana, but at this point can't. And our governor, who's Republican and a backer of President Trump, it's very hard for him to come out in favor of this, even though it would help the economy.
It's crazy because you look at some of the European countries. In Denmark, I think they've gotten like 100% of their electrical power from wind, and a lot of it from offshore wind. So they want to become the Saudi Arabia of wind.
Oh, yeah, and the Danish companies are coming down to Louisiana. They want to do that, and we sent, I say we, but a planning organization that I belong to, a private planning organization in Louisiana, helped create an exhibition trip for a series of lawmakers in Louisiana to go to Denmark, to go to Copenhagen, and then onto what's called the Jylland Peninsula, where there's a lot of port traffic and so on, to see how the Danes over many years converted some of their shipping industry facilities to facilities that could accommodate offshore wind. And they've made a lot of power, and they've made a lot of money out of that.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that Louisiana isn't using its clean natural resources rather than its oil gas resources, which are much dirtier. We hear a lot about how Louisiana has been losing tens of miles of coastline every year. I assume that's still happening down there. Are there real efforts being made to stop that loss? And what what do you see happening on that front? And as Trump kind of stopped, cooperating to make that effort effective.
There's a whole chapter in my octopus book about this. It is there is an effort, a 50-year effort on paper to restore a lot of the wetlands that Louisiana's lost. It's the largest contiguous wetland in the lower 48, and we've lost, as you say, 2,000 square miles since the Industrial Revolution, since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, and a lot of that has been because of oil and gas activity. Tearing up the coast to get the pipelines in and so on. So there's a movement, and we rely on that on those wetlands for a lot of things, habitat, and also to protect us from hurricanes. And it supports the fisheries. So we have a plan, like a $50 billion plan, to rebuild a lot of those wetlands, and we are in the process of doing that. It is what I call in the book the largest climate adaptation project in the world. And it is bringing scientists and engineers and all kinds of companies down there and so on. So it's moving forward, and it's using technologies at a scale that have never been used in the world before. We're literally opening up parts of the Mississippi River and allowing them to flow in certain chosen areas so that they bring sediment and water and rebuild wetlands in a way that's much more efficient than if we were just to do it ourselves with backhoes and pipes and things like this. And countries all over the world are coming to visit to see how we do this, because every delta has this problem, or almost every delta. And so we're moving forward. We are having a hard time finding the money to do it, right? And we rely on royalties that we get from offshore oil. We rely on monies that are appropriated by Congress. But I think it's going to move forward. I actually think we are going to prove to the world that we can do a lot of things down here with our engineering capabilities, and so I'm hopeful for that. But you're right, the Trump administration is not being terribly helpful in this regard.
Well, my understanding is that they increased the royalties that the oil companies have to pay in order to fund this project. Is that accurate?
That's right. That was a deal that actually Senator Mary Landrieu years ago orchestrated. It might surprise people to learn that the royalties on land are much more generous, right? So if you are mining in the state of Utah, for instance, 50% of the state gets 50% of all the federal royalties that come from that. And the reason is the idea is that, well, states have to pay to accommodate the environmental damage that happens, and so they should get 50% of the royalties. We don't get anywhere near 50% of the royalties. We got, our royalties were much smaller than that, and Mary Landrieu was able to get us a little bit more. And what's ironic is, of course, the damage that we experience is so much larger. But the politics are such that, that's money that otherwise could go to the treasury and help, with the deficit or whatever. So that's money that it's hard for us to get.
Last time we talked, there was a Democratic governor, Bell Edwards, and there was a plan to kind of go net zero by 2050. Kind of curious as to what happened with that one.
Yeah, that's on permanent pause, I suppose. I was on the governor's task force for that, and helped contribute to the plan, this net zero plan, which was a proclamation by the governor, an executive order, and so it doesn't have to be followed by the next governor. And so people ask me about that, and I have to say, I mean, it's obviously disappointing, because we had a plan that could have brought that offshore wind and terrestrial wind and solar into our state and made money and helped people. And so it's unfortunate that we're not doing that now. But what is good is that those plans are still there. They're actually still on the website. I sent a reporter to see them a while back. And a lot of that information, information about what wind would contribute to the state, the small amount that carbon capture and storage would produce in terms of benefit is an important number because I think a lot of people say that the carbon capture and storage is more effective, and we showed with the government's own numbers that it wasn't that effective. So a lot of that information is out there for the public to use and for policymakers to use in the future. But yeah, there's nothing going on now at the state level from the governor's office that is really pushing that forward. And it's really unfortunate because, as you know, our state is one of the most vulnerable states in the country to climate change.
Do you see private efforts to roll out wind and solar in Louisiana that are being effective?
So there are smaller communities that want to build local grids so that they have some kind of autonomy over their electricity, and these are happening in some rural areas. There are also parishes are our counties, and there are also parishes that are very interested in lowering their costs in various ways and are, making it in some cases easier for solar and wind and trying to encourage that kind of investment. And there are others, as I said, that are trying to block it, right? But here is the problem. Problem is that let's say wind companies, right? Or solar companies, they're skeptical of coming into a state if they don't know that there's going to be a market for the electricity, right? And so almost every state that has a healthy wind and solar program, in fact, most states, just period, have what are called portfolio standards, which are, sort of a green energy standard, which insists that a certain proportion of electricity that goes into the state's grid be from renewable sources. Now, there are only a few parts of the country that don't have these standards. Okay, the mountain states, that's one area, and the other area is the southeast of the United States. And if you look at a map of where wind does not exist on land in any large capacity, that map is almost exactly the map of states that don't have these portfolio standards. And so Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, all the way to Florida, nobody has any wind or solar build out of any large extent. And part of that reason is because we don't have a standard. I'll tell you a quick factoid, a quick trivia piece is that the city of New Orleans, for historical reasons that only someone in New Orleans would understand. The city of New Orleans actually has it power to create its own portfolio standard. The city council can do that, and we have done it. We have a portfolio standard in the city of New Orleans that requires more wind and, in our case, nuclear power, which we use. And so the city itself is much cleaner than many cities in the southeast. But the rest of the state, we can't do anything about.
Well, it's interesting. There's a Republican mayor out here in California that has kind of made its city net zero, and in part for economic reasons. And he convinced his Republican city council that this just made economic sense to do it, and so they built out a lot of solar and have wind, and it's generating money for them. And I think that's kind of old-fashioned Republican values versus kind of I don't know what the current regime's values are. They don't seem to be always tethered to just kind of financial interests because wind and solar are cheaper than, say even natural gas.
Well, I think if I read the politics, I think they are connected to what we call incumbency, right? There are certain industries that profit from not having renewable energy, oil and gas, namely, and the fossil fuel industry. And they're working very hard to make sure that these other types of energy don't come online.
So what do you see as some of the bright spots in moving forward given the current administration and ways that people can make a difference, even though the federal government seems to be not particularly interested in the environment at the current time.
Yeah, I think we have to act like a river, right? And you find the areas where the river can flow. And if it gets backed up in some place, then that river has to move and find, other tributaries. And right now, I think the game is in states, and not just blue states, but states that have, that have a fair amount of Republicans and Democrats, where you might be able, for instance, to roll out some kind of a solar project or a wind project. Or in our case, here in Louisiana, I'm working with a number of people to help build the legal infrastructure, to imagine the legal infrastructure for offshore wind. And we're saying, hey, well, it doesn't even have to be in the federal waters, right? We have state waters, right, within 3 miles or so from off of Louisiana, and we can permit that. Now, not with the governor that we have, and he may not be interested in that, but we can put all of that planning together now. And the other thing that we can do is we can start communicating more with the public in ways that appeal to the values that people have. There are some people who are, driven, as you say, by renewable power and getting carbon out of the atmosphere. I'm one of those people. A lot of my students are those sorts of people. There are a lot of other folks who are just like, look, I want my house to survive a storm. I want my grandkids to be able to move to Louisiana someday, because and have the life that I had, instead of fearing that it's going to be underwater or prone to floods and this kinds of thing. And so we can appeal to security, we can appeal to saving money and being wise with money. Those are the things I think that we need to gear up.
I feel like, appealing to health and linking to health, and that, clearly there's, tremendous health detriments to a dirty environment. You look at those plants along the, the Mississippi River, they're spewing just all those toxins, and Cancer Alley there, a health argument should resonate. I don't know, it doesn't seem like it's completely, taken the country by storm, but
I think that's really true. I'll tell you what. So you mentioned Cancer Alley and those plastics, the many plastic and petrochemical facilities there. And, one way you might attack the plastics issue, right? I was telling you about plastics in the ocean, is to say, oh, well, think about the health effects in Cancer Alley, right, from having this. And that appeals, right? But the other thing that I sometimes say when I'm talking about plastics to people is, I say, do you know that the scientists now say you probably have a teaspoon of plastic in your body right now, right? Some of it's in your brain, some of it's in your sexual organs, some of it is, all around. And then everybody, not just people who live in Cancer Alley, right? But everybody says, oh my gosh, why do I have plastic in my body? And is this a world I want for my kids? I think that's a good point.
well, Rob, thanks for being on the program, and, thanks for all the great work that you're doing. It's helping both, Louisiana and, around the world. That conference that you went to in Nice, and working on those ocean issues, are things that, you know, we absolutely need, and thanks for digging in and making it your life's work. Tell us, ways that, listeners can follow what you're doing and support what you're doing.
Well, I also have a podcast. It's been on hiatus for a little bit, but it's coming back. It's called Connect the Dots with Rob Verchick, and it's supported by a group called the Center for Progressive Reform. And for anybody who's interested in learning more about the democratization of electricity, the democratization of renewable energy in general, and of climate resilience, you should check out the Center for Progressive Reform. We're at progressivereform.org. And you'll see a lot of my work there, and a lot of work from some of the best academic minds who are working with communities in Louisiana, in the Virginia area, and North Carolina, and elsewhere. And you might be able to get involved that way.
Well, thank you again. Everybody should check that out. And I really appreciate the amazing work that you're doing, Rob, and keep it up. And we'll have to stay in touch. And kudos to you for really pushing the ball forward in New Orleans and being creative. And I think that that's a big part of how we're going to kind of solve these problems, is just being more creative than the other side.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for all the work you do, because communication and talking is one of the most important things we can do about the climate crisis.
I was certainly working on it, and as you say, trying to expand the group that are listening out there, so that we can get more people who are engaged on this front moving forward. So everybody can make a difference on this, and I think one of the things that helps me think about this is a Cesar Chavez quote saying, "Every dollar we spend is a vote." And so we start spending our dollars more wisely. That sends a message to companies: hey, we don't want polluting products. We're not going to spend money on plastics, or try to reduce our plastic consumption, try to reduce our fossil fuel consumption, and all these things will help turn the tide.
I like that. I like that.
To learn more about our work at A Climate Change and how you can help us reach our goal of planting 30,000 trees in the Amazon this year, visit aclimatechange.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you like this episode, please share it with a friend. See you next time.